It always comes fast to all of us. It demands everything and gives everything for us. I'm talking about family, that centerpiece of our lives, the place of origin, that gives us a sense of meaning and empowers us with purpose. You may be searching for one, starting one, or involved in one. We hope that through this season, you will explore with us the purpose, plan, and power of our families in shaping our lives through hearing our stories and sharing yours. In this sixth season of Let Us Go Deeper podcast, we look forward to learning and equipping you with resources and reasons to more faithfully and fulfillingly engage and contribute in building a healthy family. Welcome to Season 6 of Let Us Go Deeper, the podcast. What is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day and increases the chance of death by more than 50%? According to the American Psychological Association, loneliness now poses far greater threat to public health than that of obesity.
It is an epidemic. I think loneliness has enveloped this generation more than any other generation before. People are suffering literally from loneliness. I understand that I think in the UK, there's a minister for loneliness.
Yes, because the crisis has become so high, so big. In fact, now the case that is being made is that the epidemic of loneliness has much more grave consequences than even smoking or obesity.
It has become a public health
crisis.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So even the authorities recognize this thing of loneliness is serious, with serious health complications and implications.
Yeah, and I thought, and one thing I thought that was interesting is that, in comparison to something like smoking or obesity, these are things we see that are visible and that you can actually engage people and help them work out of.
You can do blood work and stuff and see, well, hey, this thing is affecting. You could do scans and see it's affecting your lungs.
Yeah, not only from even that angle, but the fact that as a family member, you can see somebody who's struggling with obesity, you can see somebody who's struggling with smoking, but you can't see somebody necessarily who's struggling with loneliness.
Most of the people who are suffering from loneliness don't show it. They mask it. It is part of their coping mechanism to keep a certain degree of stoicism about it. I'm not lonely, I'm fine. And perhaps that's the greatest problem. We are living in a time and in a context in which we mask that loneliness.
Yeah, and I think it's both ways. It's both a conscious effort to mask it, but there are some cases, and probably a good part of it, which are unconscious, where people are just finding them in states where they don't understand what's going on with their lives, but it's coming out of their state of being alone.
Part of the reason may be the fact that it isn't considered serious. In other words, to say I'm lonely makes me look weak, makes me look needy.
Yeah.
And someone will say, come on, lonely, what? Look, you have friends, find something to do. So I think we don't see it for the problem that it really is. We minimize it. So we internalize people saying, that's no big deal. But really, I think scripture in some ways addresses this issue of being alone and lonely. As Ecclesiastes 4:10-12 kind of talks about God's plan.
That speaks of, if one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken.
So the wise man paints a very interesting picture of having someone in your life, someone to count on. He says, one alone is not a good number. If you fall, no one to pick you up. If you're cold, no one to warm you. If you're alone, you can easily be destroyed, attacked, and overcome. So he's saying we need companionship, which kind of makes me wonder, Could Jesus be a substitute for real flesh and blood companionship? Some people say, no, I have Jesus, and with Jesus, I have everything. Do you think Jesus could be a substitute?
I can smile at the storm. It's interesting because as Christians, I think it's a default statement. It's a default position we move towards to sort of mask the reality of our sense of being isolated. And I think, Pastor, it's interesting that when the Bible starts out, even before sin enters the world, and God has created man, he actually makes the statements in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, that it's not good for man to be alone.
So are you telling me then, Joel, that Adam, having Jesus or whoever in the Godhead would talk to him personally in a perfect world with fellowship with the Father and the Son, that God himself is saying it isn't good for man to be alone, even though God is with him?
Exactly. And that's really what I think clearly illustrates the challenge here with the question you're asking, because God is right there with man, yet he says that it's not good that man is alone. So even with God there, man is still alone.
Interesting. If I'm hearing you clearly, you're saying we need human companionship. We need to be in some community, some setting whereby there's someone by my side, someone I can count on, someone who I know loves me, someone I can love. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, not optional. It's something, it's necessary, it's by design, and we can't default to that position we're talking about of saying, I have Jesus, so I don't need people.
Right. So some of us, we leave our countries and we go in a strange country. Some of us live here in the US and we don't even know the name of our neighbor next door. And we've been living here 3, 4, 5 years. Mm-hmm. So in this isolation, how can I find this companionship if I'm not with my family? Because I've left my family in my country of origin. I've left New York to move to California to work. Then where do I find a sense of belonging, of this companionship?
Yeah, it's interesting, Pastor, because I'm still reflecting on those statistics, because for me they strike me so strongly, because one part of those statistics does also state that over 50% of the American population suffers from this crisis. Over 50%. That's a huge segment of the population. And I think the challenge here, Pastor, is just the appreciation of what the human contact, the impact of the human contact. In fact, the statistics even goes on to say that people who suffer from this increase their percentage of death, their mortality rate by 50%. Yes. And even their morbidity, their ability to even get disease. So I think in terms of how we set ourselves up, it's a practice that has to be consciously ingrained in us, that we have to seek out relationships.
So I can go to the club, maybe I can go and party. Where do I find it? Join a gang. Where do I find it?
People do find friends in those places. It does happen. I think, speaking from our perspective as people of the church is meant to be this place where once we plug in, we can really have meaningful connection. Because remember, Pastor, again, we are saying that it's not so much being around people. It's actually having meaningful connections, meaningful social connections with other people.
So when we sing the song, I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God, we are saying that the church becomes that family away from family.
Yes.
Those ideally, friends away from friends.
Ideally, it should, because even remember, Pastor, what we've been saying, that when we talk about family, we are not just talking about your biological family.
Right.
We are speaking about the larger church family, the larger church community.
Yeah, but family is the place where we begin to nurture that sense of our identity, of being loved.
Right.
Which is why many times only children, like a child who's the only child of his or her mother and father, tends to feel lonely. I need a brother. I need a baby sister.
Right.
Because there's a sense of there's no one to play with. There's no one to relate to.
Right.
Even in larger families, like in my family, where there were 11 of us, we paired off. They're like 1, 2 brothers, the closest in age, or a brother and a sister, seem to pair off almost,
Yeah.
Like a riding partner, someone who's with you. So it is in the family that we begin to develop this social sense of belonging and community, which is then transferred into the community.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that relationship in our natural community where I live, then the church becomes that place. If, as you say, we are developing meaningful relationships. So I should stop here and ask this question. Is there a difference between aloneness and loneliness?
A big difference, Pastor.
Maybe we need to distinguish that before we move on.
Yeah, because loneliness is a perceived sense of isolation, where being alone is an actual physical sense of being separated from people.
I hear you. The way I put loneliness is a feeling or condition of being abandoned and having no one to relate to, lacking intimate relationships.
Yeah.
No support system.
Yeah, and it's funny because in many ways, when we see that text in Genesis chapter 2 verse 16, where God says it's not good for man to be alone, we always give it this romantic,
flavor,
sexual connotation of male-female relationship. But it's really speaking to this idea that we need relationship. It's not so much about the sexual aspect of it, but we need to relate with somebody. We need to have somebody who we have companionship with.
In fact, we have found out that sexually promiscuous people tend to be even more lonely. People who engage in sex for that connection, if there's no other relationship ties other than the sexual act, feel very lonely after the act is consummated. Sometimes even during the love making, there's a sense of, I'm being used, or after this, what? So you are correct. You are correct when you said it went beyond that romantic male-female dynamic. So just simply two people connecting. So loneliness is really when I sense I am alone in the world with no one to support me, no one who cares about me, no sense of encouragement, of support.
Nobody knows me. Nobody knows what I'm going through.
Right.
It's the sense that there's no meaningful interaction that is going on in my life.
I like that, no meaningful interactions, because the worst sense of loneliness is when I'm surrounded by a lot of people.
Yeah, you walk in, you say Happy Sabbath, and the church is full, and everybody says Happy Sabbath, and you smile, and everything happens, and you walk out, and you feel like
no connection to anyone around you.
Nothing happened. And it's interesting, Pastor, because I think here is another point where we can maybe develop a little bit, because I think the purpose that our churches were supposed to serve has not been served very well. Because it's interesting that this crisis of loneliness is not just hitting people in the world, in the secular world, even people in the church. People who go to these communities, who participate in these communities, are feeling alone because they come into these spaces, they attend the programs, but they are not having meaningful interactions.
Yes, and it is interesting that Jesus told the disciples, come apart and rest a while. And the Bible says in Mark chapter 2, I think it is, it says they were coming and going, and there were a lot of people around them. And yet Jesus says, come out of that crowd. Let's move apart to a desert place. It tells me then that aloneness is crucial to our sense of value, to our growth. The irony I find is when there is no aloneness, loneliness tends to increase. Because loneliness is not the absence of people, but of meaningful relationships. While aloneness is about having meaningful relationships, but choosing intentionally to recharge your batteries in time spent alone. The healthiest people are those who are able to balance aloneness with being in company. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. But you see, for me, the challenge here becomes, Pastor, even Scripture does say, I think in the Gospel, that where two or three are gathered, there will be. And it seems to me that the higher ethic here is that we seek the friendship as the basis from which then we can move into the alone spaces and not the other way around. Because I think part of what is leading to this crisis is people have prioritized the alone space.
I like that.
Over friendship.
That's interesting. My privacy.
Yes.
My privacy. Even children growing up. I remember when we first moved to Maryland, we were looking for an apartment to rent. And there were only 2-bedroom apartments available. At the time, my children were 8, 6, and 3. And they wouldn't rent us an apartment because they said, no, each child has to have his own room, or at least the 2 girls in their own room and the boy in his room. And we said, but these are children. No. They have to have their separate spaces. So I think in emphasizing my privacy, my aloneness, my individuality, which has become individualism in our culture, we have created the petri dish from which the loneliness
has emerged.
Yes, and grows and blankets us and stifles us.
Yeah.
In other cultures where there isn't so much quote unquote privacy, people seem to be happier because they're connecting more.
Mm-hmm. So even with poor economic conditions.
Even with poor economic conditions. Yeah. No, we are not down speaking or ill speaking privacy, nor are we saying everybody must be up in your business. What we are saying is the proper balance of aloneness with companionship.
Yeah, and the priority of companionship.
And the priority of companionship within the context of my life.
Yeah.
Is what will allow me to appreciate my aloneness, benefit from my aloneness, recharge myself in my aloneness to once again continue in relationship.
Yeah.
You know, one person said, happiness shared is doubled and pain shared is halved.
Yeah.
I like that because it is telling me that when I'm suffering, to have someone to talk to support me, it eases my burden.
Right.
But when I'm enjoying something wonderful, to have someone to share it with only doubles and increases my appreciation for that great experience or event. That is why, as a people, we need to recognize that we cannot be healthy, even in our Christianity, by substituting spiritual time and spiritual reality for the flesh and blood realities of friendship and relationship. Jesus could never substitute for a husband. Right. And some people wouldn't like that. So let's talk a bit about the unmarried life, the single life, because that's usually a crisis for many people. Yeah. I want someone in my life.
And even a bigger crisis for our age, because Pastor, you know, we're at the age of social media now. And for a lot of us, I think we are trying to compensate for that loneliness with more time on the social media platforms.
Yes.
And having this sense that we actually have so many connections, but they are really hollow because they are not meaningful and we don't have this human touch that we are talking about.
Yes, so there are certain aspects of life in which loneliness is felt more keenly. Mm-hmm. We all feel lonely sometimes. Maybe you're traveling and you're away from your family and you feel some loneliness, but you know I'm going to be back home within a week or 2 weeks, and that comforts you. We all suffer some degree of loneliness.
Yeah.
What we are talking about here is chronic, ingrained loneliness that results from really realizing you are all alone in the world or feeling that way.
Yeah, having that existential crisis of being isolated.
Right. So with that said, we need to recognize the stages of life or those conditions of life where loneliness seems to rear its head in a very dramatic manner. And one of them is being single and unmarried.
Yeah. And I think this is going to be interesting because Pastor, even when you brought out this idea of how, when you move from your family out into the world, how do you properly position yourself to create those kind of meaningful relationships? And for me, that's why it becomes such an important point for us to emphasize that in the family is where you practice a lot of things that you go to do out in the world. Because even I've seen you interact, for example, with your son, right. Stephen, and you guys have a very good relationship. You are friends. You know,
yes.
In some way, if somebody was to meet you having an everyday discussion, it wouldn't immediately conclude that you're father and son. It will say they're just two people having a good discussion, you know. And I think maybe in a lot of our families, the challenge has been that we have not practiced this friendship that we want to practice with people outside. So it becomes a much harder exercise when you go.
Well, then if I can only find my soulmate, that will take care of all of that. If I can only find that one woman that is for me or that man to fill my life, my soulmate, my husband,
yes,
would that solve it then?
No, because I think even before you move to that stage of desiring to get into marriage, as a single person, you need to have the right kind of friends who have taken out this need for somebody and this urgency to have somebody in your life, because that urgency in itself can be dangerous in making you pursue somebody with this ulterior agenda of saying this is what will cure my loneliness.
Ooh.
When it could be, you know, an improper choice for you.
So singleness is not really a condemnation. It's not a prison sentence. It's not being a leper where, I have no one. I need to find someone to validate myself. Mm-hmm. Singleness then is just a state.
It's a phase.
A phase of life.
Yes.
I agree, because I've often said you have more time to be married than to be single. Most people get married very young, and then you hear of people married for 60 years or 50 years. So singleness has to be that portion of my life where I learn how to interact. I learn how to have a true friend, where I develop my own sense of self and character, which will now equip me for relationship.
Right.
So I have come up with a few statements or propositions about singleness. Number one, singleness is not a curse, right? It is a period of development and freedom that should be maximized. You like that word, freedom?
There? So much.
To be maximized.
Right.
Because this is the time to say, no, I'm going to take a trip to Europe and I'm going to backpack it through Europe or backpack it through the US. This is the time to study, to get your education, learn your skills. This is the time to hang out with friends, to be spontaneous, because in marriage now there's someone else.
You're constrained by the nature of that relationship or that, that commitment.
And I believe unhappy, lonely, single people become unhappy, lonely, married people. Because marriage will not give you.
Is it possible to be lonely in marriage?
It's the worst kind of loneliness. To be married and lonely is worse than if you're single and lonely. And take it from me as a minister who have had to deal with this on so many levels for so many years. The worst singleness is the singleness of a married life, where my husband's body is there, but not his soul. My wife's body is here, but not his spirit. I am married, but I feel alone. I go to church alone, I pray alone, I watch TV alone, I have my activities alone, and I have a husband, I have a wife. So yes, you can be very lonely in marriage.
Yeah, and I think that is an even extreme form of loneliness that we don't get to really explore a lot and really sort of emphasize for a lot of our young people seeking to go into marriage.
Yes, that to be married to someone that you have not developed that companionship spirit, that true bond emotionally, is torture even. I would say torture even. So yes, singleness must be seen as a period to maximize my character development, my opportunities, my skills development. Enjoy being single, because when I'm married, it's a different kind of life.
And you're going to be married for longer.
And you're going to be married for a long time. So if you're single and happy, you will not be so urgent, that word you used before, to find someone to fill
the gap,
this space, this gap.
Yeah.
Secondly, singleness may be temporary or it may be permanent, because some people never get married. Or some people choose to remain unmarried after the death of a spouse or a divorce, etc.
Right.
Singleness is temporary usually, but it may not be that way, because there's always the possibility of marriage. But yet some people choose to remain single. Singleness may be voluntary or forced upon you. Some people choose to be single. They like being single. They like being a missionary. I can travel, I can come, I can go. I like my freedom. I can hang out with my friends, but I don't really need someone in my corner day and night. One could choose that. Even Jesus said some people choose the single life. Paul even challenged the people of Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He says, I wish you were like me, Remain single if you can. And just give your all to serving God and not having to worry about your husband's needs or your wife's needs or your children's needs. So some people may choose singleness. And to have single people who choose singleness could be a great blessing to a church and a community. These are your honorary mothers and aunts that all the children in the village or the church can run to and find a loving pair of hands. These are the women and men who can mentor a young man or mentor a young woman, who can see a harried mother in church and say, let me take the baby for you for a few moments. So yes, singleness could be a ministry even. And the other thing I find is that singleness is a gift. Jesus says it's a gift. Not everyone can handle being single. Because if in singleness you feel lonely, you feel deprived of companionship, then singleness would be a curse. But some people have this gift of singleness, to not feel that need for someone right in my corner, a husband or wife. Again, like I said, people who see singleness as a gift and who have the gift for it become a great blessing.
Yeah, and that's powerful, Pastor, because I don't think we quite see, more so in this generation, those benefits of singleness. I think we are so enamored by, again, social media, because what social media is pushing and the culture at large, Pastor, I think you have to accept that we live in a culture that has so much romanticized being married and getting into relationship and having a sexual partner, and you know, it has really elevated these norms and these ideas such that we feel that pressure, you know.
Yes.
And so we don't get to explore the value, the beauty, the opportunity that singleness provides us with.
Wow, that's so well put, Joel. And if we don't, we get married unprepared for the married life, because now we're trying to be single while being married.
Yeah, and maybe that's why, Pastor, the divorce rates are what they are today.
Yes, 50% of marriages, at least in America and many countries of the West.
In fact, they say it's 50% of marriages are divorced, and of the 50 remaining ones, 50% of those are in trouble.
So we are really in a bad state.
Yes, we are. It's very few marriages, I think, that are really experiencing this kind of joy that we talk about, Pastor, because we realize a bit, you know, me and you've been married for over 30 years. I'm just getting into it, that marriage takes work. It takes effort to really appreciate the value of what you've entered into. And I think for a generation that is so quickly moving into this state, it becomes a big challenge because we are not prepared. We are not willing to be that patient. We have not practiced those characteristics that are necessary for us to have successful marriages. And yet, as you were saying, now we get into this cycle where we think marriage will resolve our issue. We get into marriage, we end up divorced, and we end up in a worse state than before we got married.
Yes. Greater loneliness, because there's a sense of failure that comes with divorce. You see, if I'm single and I'm feeling lonely, I'm always thinking, when I meet that person, my soulmate, then you meet this guy, you meet this woman, oh, she's everything I ever wanted in a woman. She makes me so happy. Oh, he fills my heart. You know what we say. And then I'm married, and after 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, trouble and divorce. So I'm lonely, I'm troubled, but now I have this sense of defeat, of failure as a husband, as a wife, as a woman, as a man, which adds to loneliness, which adds to my sense of dejection. So you are right. If we enter marriage to make marriage what it wasn't meant to be, a lollipop, a happiness pill, we will be very disappointed, and we will fail, because marriage wasn't really meant to make us happy. It was meant to develop us.
Wow, that's tough. To tell that to my generation, because we want to go in there to be happy, Pastor. We want to go there to be made happy, not even to be happy.
In most other cultures, in most other ages, marriage was seen for just what it was, a financial, economic, social covenant to keep the species going, to get children to work the fields, you know, to have a sustenance. I'm not a woman alone without someone. My father married me off to this man. What I'm saying is, we have romanticized the marriage and made it what it was not meant to really be. Marriage develops me. It erodes my selfishness, my self-centeredness. It causes me to be mature if I'm ready for it. So contented, whole single people make contented, whole married people, which increases the happiness, because happiness shared is doubled. So if I'm a well-adjusted human being with meaningful relationships with my friends in my church, in my community, and I get married to this special person, I'm now sharing my wholeness with another person who is sharing their wholeness. We can blossom and grow.
Right.
But you have two lonely, selfish, immature people seeking happiness in each other. They're going to suck the life out of each other. So marriage can be happy and will be happy, but it doesn't make us happy.
There again goes the reader. Yeah, and I think we have to appreciate this complexity, because I think, Pastor, the other thing that I think really contributes to the loneliness crisis we face in our generation is because of this difficulty of navigating relationships. Because again, relationships are not easy. Having friends and developing a deep intimacy with them is not easy. Just like in marriage, it takes a lot of self-forgetfulness, sacrifice, humility, a willingness to take some deep cuts in the process.
Yes, especially marriage. I remember once I preached a marriage sermon, and I used Matthew 5:48, love your enemies. Matthew 5, love your enemies. And I remember the couple kind of looked at me like this, and like, what are you preaching? But then I was showing that just as two people could stand here and promise to love each other and all of that, that person could become your worst enemy. Even the Bible says the person who sleeps on the bed can become your worst enemy. Have you ever seen a bitter divorce? Have you ever seen a couple with a bitter divorce? You would swear these people never even liked each other. So that person can become your enemy. The principle of marriage is one of giving up your stubbornness, your pride, and your selfishness. Which is why Jesus says in Matthew chapter 19, 8 and 9, he says, Moses gave you divorce because of
the hardness of your heart.
Mm-hmm. Jesus is saying, therefore, if you enter marriage still selfish, still immature, still stubborn, still prideful, you are doomed to fail in your marriage. You have just bought a ticket to divorce court.
Wow.
But any marriage could be happy if we have people who have surrendered, have broken up that hard heart.
Is that what it has taken you, Pastor? Because you've been married for how many years now? 32 years now.
A lot of breaking up of that. A lot of breaking up of the hard heart. A lot of negotiation.
Right.
A lot of picking your battles, walking away. Not just me. Cynthia, too, lovely Cynthia Sato also do that with me. Be patient. But any successful marriage that is truly happy, you will hear words like compromise, sacrifice, forgiveness, picking your battles, walking away. In other words, to have a happy marriage, you need to surrender the hardness of the heart. You need to put that heart under the great rock, Jesus Christ, that he might fall on it and crush it. That is why to marry a selfish person could bruise your spirit and become a very lonely road. Just today I was counseling with someone who is going through a similar situation of feeling like her husband is sucking everything out of her and she has nothing left to give. Which brings me to this question before we move on. What about divorce? Is divorce necessarily wrong?
I mean, it's interesting because, Pastor, even as we talk about divorce, the rates of divorce in the church and outside of the church have been the same. Pretty much, there's no significant difference in terms of the numbers.
Which is sad.
Which is very sad, because you could expect that with the equipping we have in the church, with the understanding we have, with the perspective we have on the purpose that marriage serves, we should do better. But I will then venture to say that I don't think it's bad in and of itself, as if it's conceived out of a situation that is dangerous, a situation that is maybe terminal in its abusive. Those are conditions where divorce is necessary, because otherwise you're putting people in real danger and in real harm's way.
Even spiritual danger, because it is one thing to have my body in danger, like domestic violence.
Right.
It's another thing to have my mind receive a crushing blow day by day with abusive words, emotional abuse as well. So that is why Jesus said God allowed divorce. He didn't mean for there to be divorce. He says in the beginning, it wasn't so. But that condition of the hardness of the heart became such a big issue that even God himself says, I hate divorce, Malachi 2:16. But yet, you know what? Sometimes it might be the way to go. Which is why Paul said the same thing in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, if the unbeliever doesn't desire to stay, let him go. God has called you to peace. God has called you
to peace. Right.
So in a marriage where there's fighting and you can't seem to see eye to eye, there may come a point in time when you have to go your separate ways. It is not ideal, but sometimes it's necessary. And somebody might say, well, Pastor, then Jesus said, unless you divorce for adultery, you need to stay single. I wish we had more time to really go into it, but I don't believe Jesus was trying to tie a chain around anybody's neck to stay in an unhealthy relationship and never find the love and companionship we all desire that we were created for. What I believe that statement was saying is, marriage is not a game to be entered in and left for any and every reason. What he was actually saying is, even adultery is not cause to end the marriage. And in our next lesson, I think we talk a bit about those kind of stuff. But if I commit adultery, I have broken the covenant with my wife. So she is now free to either forgive me and embrace me to wholeness again, or to walk away because I broke the covenant. Yet, true love would seek to restore, just as God restored Hosea and Gomer, just as God restored Israel and restores us. Yet, God himself had to divorce Israel at one point and walk away from her and start a new movement with his Christian church. So sometimes divorce is necessary. Remarriage, most people think it should only be done if the cause of the divorce was adultery. And like I said, I wish we had more time to explore it, but I do believe that statement that Jesus gave was not to chain someone to marriage that can never be happy, but was simply making us conscious that marriage was meant to be a lifelong commitment between two persons and should be taken in the same seriousness that I am not going to walk away from this. For any reason.
And then I think, Pastor, that's the area where a lot of us have a challenge, because where do we establish that marker that says this is serious enough, or this is wrong enough for me to say this is where I'm gonna go my way? Because I think for a lot of people, and more so again, I will reference my generation, because I think we are lowering that bar ever so often and making it, if I'm gonna feel a little bit of stress, some words are gonna be spoken, I'm gonna walk away, when really maybe those are some of the processes that are gonna make that marriage better if you walk through them.
And that is why the question of the disciples was, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? And back in the time, men were divorcing their wives for any reason. I didn't like how you cooked this morning. I didn't like this. You can walk away. So Jesus is saying, hey, hold a minute. So you are right. What we have done today is to lower the bar just to what the disciples were talking about. For any reason. Hey, I'm uncomfortable, I don't like the fact that I'm not having as much money as I hoped. He snores too loudly. Jesus is saying, no, that's not a game. This is not a game we're playing here. However, there are situations in which walking away is the only healthy thing to do.
Yes.
For your own well-being and for the children. Because children who grew up in abusive homes have their minds totally messed up. And they themselves may perpetuate that abuse or being abused in their own relationships. So sometimes, staying in a marriage that is unhealthy not only destroys you, but can destroy the young ones as well. And it is not for us to determine exactly when, but the person in marriage begins to feel oppressed, stifled, and that their best efforts avail nothing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these challenges, Pastor, do occur in marriages that are codependent. Because part of the benefit of really developing your character during the singleness phase is that you build a sense of your identity and a sense of your values.
Amen.
And a sense of when is somebody crossing the line when they relate with you.
Amen. You could not have said it better. Amen. If you have not identified yourself, who you are, your value, if you have not determined these are the boundaries that cannot be violated, you enter marriage without those spaces being protected.
Being clear, yeah.
And being clear. And finally, so we have singleness, we have divorce, we have being married and being lonely. But perhaps one of the greatest sting of loneliness comes from the death of a loved one, like a spouse.
That's big. That's difficult.
Yes. I have a friend, she's like a mother to me. When her husband died, he died very suddenly. And they had one of those really happy marriages. She grieved for 3 years.
Wow.
Would go to his grave and cry every week, oh, how could you have left me? Until one day she said she went, and like if the Lord said, okay, enough. How long would you continue?
3 years. That's a long period,
yes.
Pastor. That's a long period to grieve.
And she never married again. She was still a young woman when her husband died, but she never married again. She said, well, if I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, why should I go looking for second best? And she just chose the gift of singleness from the Lord, and she just dedicated everything, her time, her energy, her money, just to the gospel. Suitors were coming left and center. A very beautiful woman. Hey, we could be friends, but I'm with my God. I'm with my Lord. And she just dedicated everything to God. I admire her spirit. I admire that dedication to Christ and even to singleness. And she said, when he died, she felt something ripped out of her, a big hole and space. That is how we became friends, because I had just entered this district, and we were the last people that she and her husband had lunch with. It was a Sabbath afternoon. Cynthia and I, we had what a wonderful Sabbath afternoon of fellowship. That very following week he died. Wow. So that created a bond. We would visit and talk to her and encourage her, and that built, again, bonding.
Friendship.
Pain shared is half.
Yeah, you remember, Pastor, and 2 episodes ago, we were talking about the choices we make in life, because life is going to happen.
Life is going to happen.
And so even in those single seasons, the friendships you build will buffer you even when marriage is struggling, and even when you lose a loved one.
Yes. And so she would go to that cemetery, go to that grave, and then that day when she heard that voice in her head saying, how long will you continue like this? Enough. And she realized she was letting life just pass her by, locked into this box with this one person. And she said, she was a release. She passes by and she looks and she said, this is very special. She remembers, but she no longer
attached.
Yes, she has been released. And this brings me to the point of grief. I know we're not going to stay too long, but people need to grieve in their loneliness. I think one of the problems with our modern society and even in churches is that we don't allow people to acknowledge their loneliness and grieve through their loneliness. So they need to cover it up with God is good all the time God is good, blessed be the tie that binds, even when I'm hurting inside. And I can't tell Joel, I feel lonely.
Yeah.
My wife died and I feel like I don't want to live, I feel I have no friends. I go home at night and there's no one there,
Yeah, and that's true, because, Pastor, as I was saying again earlier on when we were talking about this, you can be wounded, you can be hurt, you can be lost, you can feel lost in the world, you can feel like you don't know your sense of meaning. But to be alone is the worst kind of state. It's not so much, because when you're wounded but you have a friend to walk with, it's much easier.
Definitely.
When you're lost, it's much easier, and that's why you say that pain shared is pain halved. And so even as you share that, I'm thinking about that reality that we don't create spaces where we are giving priority to companionship.
Yes, and that is why we come back to what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. If one falls, who will pick him up?
Yeah.
If one is cold, who's going to warm him up?
Yeah.
What Solomon is saying is, I need people in my life.
Yeah, and not only romantic, because I think, Pastor, there is a way in which we read these texts and just make them about these heterosexual relationships, and not about friendship as a principle, as creating relationship with people, regardless of sex.
And this is where church should be a great buffer,
right?
The place where I could find friends without benefits,
Yeah.
Relationships that fill those spaces, those voids.
Yeah.
As a single person, as a divorced person,
Yeah.
as a married person who is living like single because my husband is not a Christian, my wife is not a Christian, and we don't share much. As a widow, as a widower, to have people I can cry to, I can lean on, because death is so permanent.
It is. It is, Pastor. And I think that's why we should intentionally practice this habit of creating friends. Because it seems to me, again, even as you speak about death, life is going to happen. And our skills and ability to create a relationship is going to be the buffer against these vicissitudes of life.
Yes. That it doesn't devastate us completely.
Yes.
And in saying that, being a true friend means allowing people to have alone time. Even if you're a husband or wife, you need alone time to recharge your batteries, to recenter yourself in who you are and with God. Also, if I've missed someone, if I'm divorced, if I'm a single person who has not been able to find a spouse, and I think I'm getting old, if I'm a widow or widower, I need friends who understand I need to grieve and give me that space to grieve, and will comfort me in my grief without minimizing my feeling, without making me feel guilty for grieving.
Right. Who empathize.
Yes.
Yeah, because again, the benefit of friendship is not so much that you have people here who are going to be telling you what to do all the time. It's really you have people who can sit and bear the pain with you.
A ministry of presence. I'm just there for you. Just to give you a hug.
Ministry of
just
presence.
To sit there while you cry and hold your hand.
And listen.
And listen.
Yeah.
That is necessary. And that is what we need most in this hectic world in which we live, where we are always striving for a new job, working longer hours. We need people for those moments when we really just need to have a shoulder to lean on and to grieve. Because healing comes when we are able to grieve.
Yeah, and one thing that I've come to learn, Pastor, is that the nature of the problems and the pain we face, for example, even when you lose somebody, is such that as a person, I may not understand the kind of relationship you had with that partner or husband or friend. And so I can't even say that I know how you feel because I also lost a friend or I lost a husband. Because the relationship you had with your husband, just like you're talking about the lady, was so special, was so unique to what I had. And so even that comparison becomes a means of minimizing your pain or just misunderstanding your pain. And I think we have to develop these spaces where we learn to just be present and we learn to listen, because I think for a lot of people, when they're able to know that they can listen without this being framed in some well-packaged solution, it relieves them because the solution is not easily available.
I remember Cynthia traveled to Trinidad last year. First time she's traveling without me, and I couldn't be in the house. Because she went and Kezia was away, and I would come home and I felt so weird. I began to appreciate what it's like to be a widow. Now, I knew she was coming back and I looked forward to her coming back like a little baby looking forward to Christmas. But while she was away, I would go into the bedroom and realize I'm not hearing that voice, not feeling that presence on the bed, not having that person to chat with. So in that moment, you understand why having someone in your corner is so great. Yet, there are Sundays when she wants me to go shopping with her, and I said, please, I want to stay home, And she goes, and I'm all excited to be home alone, watching TV, my shows, or just playing the piano. Because sometimes when I want to watch TV, I want to look at football, I want to look at Star Wars, they want to look at some romantic something, So what I'm saying is, in that we see the balance of having someone and needing to be alone.
Right.
So sometimes she says, you want to be alone today? I say, yeah, okay, I'll go on my own.
And Pastor, you are an introvert. And I guess that's why maybe this idea of being alone is so important to you. Because for me, I'm really struggling to understand why you're emphasizing that portion of it. I can do with people all day, all night. And so I appreciate that. And I think part of this is understanding the person, because even the portion, the magnitude of the alone time we need is different. Some people need it more than others, so I appreciate that you have stood out for the introverts.
Yes, so my brothers and sisters, our friends, we hope this discussion has been able to shed light on your situation, give some tools to work through your situation, and that you recognize that being alone was never God's plan, or being lonely was never God's plan. And so as you seek to find relationships, may God guide and direct you towards those people who can truly stand by you and, like Solomon says, be that person that is tit tightly bond with you. I said a 3-strong cord can hardly be broken.
Yeah, and that even for us as individuals, we should also pursue those relationships and invest in people and intentionally seek to create these relationships that will buffer us from being alone.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Let Us Go Deeper. Let Us Go Deeper is an independent ministry, and your support is critical to our operations. Please make any contributions that you can to patreon.com/LUGD. That is patreon.com/LUGD.